the Gen Z or the alphas or whatever are coming up now, they're going to grow up in a very different landscape than what we did. Because I think the reason that we're here and we're on the internet and we're talking is because, and people are listening, that's the important part. People are listening is because we kind of came up in the age of like bro lore, like bro science, like do this because the big guy at the gym said so. Right. And we got into this phase of like the internet where there's just all this information out there, but it was bad information. A lot of it was. And what you and I did when we started this podcast is we took the ideas that we thought were bad information and we dismantled them. Right. And that's what we continue to do is we try and put out better information. Right. And that's every single time I turn on this computer and hopefully the microphone and camera. But that's what I try and do is I try and put forth like, this is what I'm thinking about the current landscape of whatever topic that we're talking about. And that has evolved and has changed over time. But I think the one true thread that's run through the entire time is like, I'm trying to spread better information. Now, that's something that as the internet became more apparent and we got iPhones and there's Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and all these apps that spread information, a lot of it was about people that were just on these apps that were drawing attention, right? And I think the shift, kind of like I said, like the science-based lifters earlier, I think the shift now is going to be, it's not necessarily the information age, but with AI, it's better information, right? And I think AI it's subject to the user input, right? So I think a smarter person can get better information out of AI than a dumber person, or someone with some sort of area expertise can use AI in a way that amplifies that area expertise. But someone that doesn't, they can't cross that barrier. They can't become an expert if they don't already have background knowledge in how to do this. So I think that the change or the shift that we're going to see with people now is that I don't think people are going to accept information at face value anymore, because ChatGPT, it's come a long way in a short period of time, right? And that's the thing about this is it's going to grow exponentially. It's going to get exponentially better, faster. Like it's going to get better from today to tomorrow than it did from yesterday to today. So I think the next shift that we're going to see is that the information that is readily available is going to be of higher quality than it was maybe 15 years ago when people just had more widespread access to information. And like you and I, when we were kind of coming up in this space, we had to dig to get good information on the internet in the areas that we really wanted to find it. And what we had to do is we had to appraise that information as we got it. And that's kind of a scary thought, because I think that appraisal part of it is going to go away. It's going to be more scarce because a lot of people that don't have area expertise, they're just going to blindly rely on AI. And I do think that the quality of information from AI is getting better and better. And like, I do think that everyone's going to have to utilize it to be able to be competitive and to be able to keep up in their respective fields. And I don't look at that as a bad thing. I don't look at that as like, oh, you're lazy. I look at it as like, if you're intelligent, you're going to use the most efficient ways or the best available tools. And I think if it's not there, I think very soon it will be one of the best available tools to vet information. But the scary side of that is that, all right, maybe there's better information readily available, but the ability to appraise that information is going to get more and more scarce. And that's, I think, a really interesting thing to see how that maps out over the next 5-10 years. Because almost in the way that like there was this spike of information and people that were relevant because they're on the internet and they're doing something on the internet. I think it's going to take a little bit of a different trajectory now with AI, because I can watch I don't know if I'll say the names, I don't give a fuck about anyone, but like a science guy podcast talking about science guy things that put real money in his pocket versus someone that's listening to that being like, let me type that in ChatGPT and see what it says. And I think that maybe now it's condensing or it's eliminating that actual appraisal process. But I think people will have more readily available access to better information. And I don't exactly know how it's going to change the trajectory of this shit that we do, meaning like in the exercise space, in the fitness space, but also like the way that people live their lives and kind of synthesize information in real time.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus, there's so much to unpack. So one, I think I want to I want to kind of not necessarily claim. I want to denote and demarcate something that you talked about, and that's this idea. Essentially, what you talked about is, so I have a friend of mine. I may have talked about him on the podcast before. His name is Enrique. Enrique is a PhD economist from Stanford University, and he's going to hate that I'm talking about him. And I will literally send anyone who DMs me, I have it on my computer, his paper that got published. I forget what journal, one of the big four economic journals in the world. And now, mind you, Enrique posted or published 2 papers in 2 of these journals before he even graduated. Like, we're talking like a once in a generation type brain. And he talked to me about this paper. We had dinner in New York a couple of years back, and he was on a tour because he was asked to speak to OpenAI and Harvard and Stanford and MIT and all that about this paper. And what you're describing is more or less the thesis of this paper that explains the economic impact of AI. So look at Jay just stumbling onto, because I'll give it, this paper was considered by his peers worthy of the Nobel Prize. And what he highlighted, yeah, look at Jay just stumbling into Nobel Prizes.
Let me throw another sin in.
Basically a celebratory Nobel Prize in. When basically what he proposed in this paper is that AI will disrupt knowledge hierarchies. So we think this is actually happening in legal. Actually, I heard that they just were banning the use of one of these. I think it's called Claude in legal circles, and it's like so good at like, hey, I need legal precedent for this. But here's what happens. Here's how a normal law firm works, and I, had my fair share of lawyers for fair share of reasons, so I kind of know how the system works a little bit. But essentially, from a career perspective, you have partners in the law firm that have sort of proven their value and really just billables over time. They made a shit ton of money, and now they have like a stake in the business. And you kind of have these like understudy lawyers, first year, second year, third year, and then you have paralegals and things like that. So you have this hierarchy of knowledge, right? Like you have like your senior partners or founding partners that have been there since Jump Street, that have seen it all, have done it all. And then they have their understudies. Now what's happening in these law firms is large language models are cutting the rungs of the knowledge hierarchy so that it's very difficult for these understudies, early graduates, because they're not getting prompted to do the work to climb that ladder to be the senior partner. So what happens if all the senior partners die is you're kind of left with like ChatGPT being the smartest thing in the room, but it needs to be prompted correctly. And you have these understudies that didn't really get the opportunity to climb the knowledge hierarchy. And he sort of goes on to explain the economic impact of the inability for professions and skills to climb the requisite knowledge hierarchy. So what I think when I see that, and this is something that I think is really pertinent to the podcast, to stuff that I talk about. Obviously, I think it's pertinent because I talk about it. I think AI will bring about a philosophical revolution. You have all the answers. Who's got the better questions? That's what philosophy is, right? Science is the study and the pursuit of answers, where philosophy is really about kind of just sitting around with a Zen in, looking up at the sky and going like, all right, like I'm going to ask some interesting questions. Like think about Galileo, right? Mad chilling. Huh. Wonder if that Jesus fella, wonder if he knew about this thing, right? Like what do? They just ask questions, right? Like Plato, Socrates, all these guys, they were all philosophers, but philosophy is really the incubator for scientific exploration. Medicine, engineering, mathematics, all of this started from a philosophical seed. And then when they got enough legs, it differentiated out of philosophy. But it all starts with questions, right? Like ChatGPT, like for example, not many people know about the back end of our business. And I kind of like that. But like we have a dude in the back end of our business that is like incalculably smart. right?
Yes.
Like you could try, but if the wind blew a different way, his IQ would fluctuate on paper by like 10 or 15 points, right? And he'd still be in like the high, I don't know, like the high hundreds. Matt Penny is like one of the, like, a once in your life, you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is next level smart. What he's atop the knowledge hierarchy in tech, right? Like you and I have enough experience in learning the right answers from the wrong answers and learning the consequence of wrong answers, and we can prompt things well. What he's able to do with AI is insane, right?
Yes.
Like he's like, I'm going to build a robot to fix this problem, and I'm like, that's great. And then 3 days later, we have this like internet robot that like does stuff for us. So I think that's where, if I'm a trainer right now, right? And I think one of the first questions you have to ask is, what am I missing? That's a great place to start.
Mhm.
So, to the essence of that question, if you're the 1% and 99% thing, the best philosophical question to ask yourself is, what am I missing? That's a great seed bed for a personal philosophy that's going to lead you. Because if you don't start thinking about training philosophy, like how and why you ask questions that you do, and it's all about just arriving at the answer, well, we have an app for that. Just go into ChatGPT, you get all the answers in the world. But you can't yet, and who knows where this is going to go, you can't come up with the right prompts to find the right answers. And that's where the advantage lies. And that's where real world experience and critical thinking skills, I think, is you're going to have a hard time offsetting that. You're going to have a hard time digitizing that process. I think that is something that, if we think about the intangible to the human organism, that, that whatever that 1.3% or 1.7% difference between us and chimps is, it's that. Like, chimps aren't sitting around looking at them, and maybe they are, but then they just start throwing shit at each other or whatever. Like, wonder if the Pope knows. Like, the sun seems, they're not doing that, right? The curiosity seems to be, at least their ability to meaningfully act on it and produce from that, seems to be a remotely or predominantly a human trait. So that's where, like, I look at this question and I understand it in the context of like today's sort of discourse, social media discourse. And in a broader context and outside of fitness, like, you see this, started with like Fahrenheit 9/11, and then it's just like, oh, okay, like, 9/11 was planned by the government. You're like, oh, fuck. I guess it started with like JFK assassination or something like that. And it just like spiraled into this thing. And now that I know something you don't know, that's not a truth, but it's important for your survival because that's what you optimize for. I think in this day and age, like that, it flattens the curve a little bit, no pun intended. And it's like, look, the advantage lies to the person not with the best answer. It's the person that can arrive at the answer to the better question. So that's where, like, I wanted to lean in on that question, because, like, okay, like, yeah, I think some people think stability is dumb, but most people who actually train, like, see the principle and the practical answer. But, like, dig deeper than that, because that's a contagion. That if you catch that contagion, you just start making fucking face and camera videos, and your career goes to shit. Right? That's not a philosophical ethos that's going to find you well in this or any profession. So get clear on your philosophy, and that'll guide you through the next turning of the information age. That's kind of my dissertation on that.